The rain fell softly on the cemetery as Grayson Lancaster stood beside his mother's casket. At 42 years old, he had everything money could buy, but right now, he felt completely alone. Margaret Lancaster had been more than just his mother. She was the only person who had truly known him, who had loved him no matter what. She would have wanted more flowers, he heard someone whisper behind him. The comment made him angry. His mother had been a simple woman who never cared for fancy things even after he had made his millions in real estate development. Grayson barely listened to the priest's words. His mind kept going back to their last conversation when she had tried to tell him something important, but he had been too busy, promising to visit next week. Next week never came. She died in her sleep 3 days later. The funeral drew quite a crowd. Margaret had been well loved in their small Connecticut town, having taught elementary school for over 30 years. Former students, colleagues, and neighbors all came to pay their respects. Grayson nodded politely as people offered their condolences, but his heart wasn't in it. Then something caught his eye. 4 boys, probably around 10 years old, standing at the back of the crowd. At first he thought he was seeing things. They were identical. Same dark hair, same sharp jawline, same green eyes. His eyes. Grayson felt his heart stop. The boys looked exactly like he had at that age. A woman stood with them, trying to keep them quiet and orderly. Though she wore large sunglasses, there was something familiar about her, something that made his chest tighten. Before he could get a better look, they disappeared into the crowd. "Mr. Lancaster," his assistant, David, touched his arm. "The lawyers want to meet with you about your mother's estate." "Did you see them?" Grayson asked, still staring at the spot where the boys had been. "See who, sir?" "The boys. 4 of them. They looked..." He shook his head. Maybe grief was making him imagine things. Back at his mother's house, Grayson sat in her kitchen, surrounded by casseroles brought by well-meaning neighbors. The house smelled like her, like cinnamon and fresh laundry. He picked up a framed photo from the counter. It showed him and his mother at his company's opening 10 years ago. She had been so proud that day. As he set the photo down, he noticed something sticking out from behind it. An envelope, yellowed with age, addressed to him in his mother's handwriting. With trembling hands, he opened it. "My dearest Grayson," it began. "If you're reading this, then I'm gone, and there's something you need to know. 10 years ago, Isabel came to me." Isabel. The name hit him like a physical blow. Isabel Hart, the only woman he had ever truly loved. The one who disappeared. Without a word 10 years ago. "She was pregnant, Grayson, with your children, 4 beautiful boys." The room started spinning. Grayson gripped the counter to steady himself. 4 boys, the ones at the funeral, his sons. "She made me promise not to tell you," the letter continued. "She said it was to protect them. I wanted to tell you so many times, but I gave her my word. I'm sorry, my son. The truth is in the blue box in my closet. Find them, Grayson. They need their father." Grayson rushed upstairs to his mother's bedroom. The blue box sat on the top shelf of her closet, covered in dust. Inside, he found photographs, dozens of them, school pictures, birthday parties, baseball games, his sons growing up, and in many of them, Isabel looking exactly as he remembered her. He sank to the floor, surrounded by the evidence of the life he never knew he had. 10 years. He had missed 10 years of his children's lives. Why had Isabel kept this from him? What could have been so terrible that she felt she needed to hide their existence? His phone buzzed. Another message from his office about an urgent development deal. Usually business was his whole life. But now none of it mattered. His entire world had just shifted on its axis. Grayson gathered the photos and the letter, his mind already racing. He had resources, connections. Finding Isabel wouldn't be difficult. But what would he say when he found her? How do you start a conversation with the woman who kept your children's secret for a decade? One thing was certain. He wasn't going to let them disappear again. Whatever reasons. Isabel had, whatever had happened in the past, he had a right to know his sons, and they had a right to know their father. As he left his mother's house, Grayson looked back one last time. "Thank you, Mom," he whispered. Even in death, she had found a way to give him what he needed most, the truth. Now he just had to figure out what to do with it. Grayson couldn't sleep that night. He sat in his luxury penthouse apartment, spreading the photos from his mother's blue box across his desk. 4 identical faces smiled up at him from various moments in time: birthday parties, school plays, little league games, his sons. The word still felt strange in his mind. "David," he called his assistant first thing in the morning, "cancel all my meetings for the next month." "Sir, but the Chicago deal can wait. I need you to find someone for me." Isabel Hart, last known address, was here in Connecticut about 10 years ago. There was a pause on the line. The same Isabel Hart who used to work for the company. Yes. Grayson's throat felt tight. Isabel had been his company's first employee back when he was just starting out. That's how they met, how they fell in love. While David worked on tracking down Isabel, Grayson studied the photos more carefully. In one, the boys wore baseball uniforms, Riverside Little League. In another, they stood in front of an elementary school. Clues. His mother had left him clues. He drove to Riverside, a small town 30 minutes away. The Little League field was empty this early in the morning. A maintenance worker was marking the lines for an upcoming game. "Excuse me," Grayson approached him. "Do you know the Hart boys, 4 identical twins?" The man smiled. "The quadruplets? Sure do. Best players in the league. Their mom works at the library downtown." Grayson's heart raced. After 10 years, she... Was this close? The Riverside Public Library was a small brick building with ivy climbing its walls. Grayson parked his expensive car across the street, feeling strangely nervous. Through the window he could see someone shelving books, dark hair in a simple braid. Isabel. She looked different, yet exactly the same. A little older maybe, but still beautiful in that quiet way that had first caught his attention. She wore simple clothes now, not the business suits he remembered. Before he could get out of his car, 4 boys burst through the library doors, school backpacks bouncing. "Mom!" they called out. "Can we go to Tommy's house?" Grayson watched, frozen, as Isabel hugged each boy. Even from here he could tell them apart. One had a small scar above his eyebrow. Another wore glasses. The third had his shirt untucked. The 4th stood a bit apart, reading a book while his brothers talked. "James, your glasses are crooked." Isabel straightened them for the boy. "Michael, tuck in your shirt. Nathan, share that book with your brothers. And Daniel, no video games at Tommy's, remember?" Their names. His sons had names. James, Michael, Nathan, and Daniel. Tears filled his eyes as he watched them interact. They were happy, loved, well cared for. But they should have known their father. A knock on his car window startled him. A police officer stood there, looking suspicious. "Sir, we've had reports of someone watching the library. Can I see some ID?" Grayson handed over his driver's license, realizing how this must look. "I can't explain," he started. But when he looked back at the library, Isabel and the boys were gone. The officer returned his license. "Mr. Lancaster, the developer, what brings you to Riverside?" "Those boys," Grayson said quietly. "They're mine, but they don't know it yet." The officer's expression softened. "That's quite a situation, but watching from a car isn't the way to handle it." He was right. Grayson started the car, but not to leave. He drove around the block to the library's parking lot. It was time to face Isabel. Inside, the library smelled of old books and furniture polish. A young assistant pointed him toward the reference section. With each step, memories flooded back. Isabel's laugh during late nights at the office, the way she believed in his dreams when nobody else did. The ring he had been about to buy when she disappeared. He found her in the biography section, organizing books on a cart. She looked up when she heard his footsteps, and the book she was holding fell to the floor. "Grayson," she whispered, all the color draining from her face. "Hello, Isabel." His voice was surprisingly calm. "I think it's time we talked about our sons." She gripped the book cart for support. "How did you—" "I saw them at Mom's funeral, and she left me a letter." He took a step closer. 10 years, Isabel. You kept them from me for 10 years. I need to know why." Tears filled her eyes. "You don't understand. I had no choice." "No choice." His calm began to crack. "They're my children." "Shh." She glanced around nervously. "Not here. Please." "I get." Off work at 5. Meet me at Carter's Cafe on Main Street. Grayson wanted to demand answers right now, but he could see the fear in her eyes. Real fear. What was she so afraid of? 5 o'clock, he agreed. Don't run, Isabel. Not again. I'll find you no matter where you go. She nodded, wrapping her arms around herself. I won't run. But Grayson, there are things you don't know, things that could put them in danger. He left the library with more questions than answers. Danger? What kind of danger could make a mother hide her children from their father for 10 years? In his car, he looked at the photos again. 10 years of birthdays, holidays, first days of school, all moments he should have shared. Whatever Isabel's reasons, nothing could justify stealing those memories from him, from their sons. 5 o'clock couldn't come fast enough. But as Grayson sat in Carter's Cafe waiting, he had no idea that the truth would be far worse than anything he had imagined. Carter's Cafe was almost empty when Isabel walked in at exactly 5 o'clock. She had changed out of her library clothes into a simple blue dress, her hair still in that practical braid. Grayson watched her scan the room nervously before approaching his table in the corner. You came, he said, standing up. For a moment, neither of them knew what to do. Shake hands? Hug? How do you greet someone who broke your heart and had your children in secret? The boys are at their baseball practice, she said, sitting down. We have an hour. A waitress came over, but Grayson waved her away. He couldn't wait another second. Why, Isabel? Just tell me why. Isabel's hands shook as she reached into her purse and pulled out an old envelope. Do you remember the week before I left, when you were closing that big deal with Victor Romano? Of course I remember. It was going to put the company on the map. But what does that have to do with everything? She pushed the envelope across the table. It has everything to do with why I left. Inside were photographs, grainy security camera shots. In them, Victor Romano was meeting with known criminals. There were documents too, showing massive money laundering operations. I found these on my desk that morning, Isabel said quietly. Along with this, she handed him a note yellowed with age. The message was made from cut-out magazine letters. Tell anyone and Lancaster dies. Grayson felt the blood drain from his face. Why didn't you come to me? I tried, but then I discovered I was pregnant. Not just with one baby, but 4. And 2 days later, my apartment was broken into. Nothing was taken, but there was a baby sock left on my pillow, cut in half. Tears rolled down her cheeks. They knew, Grayson. They were watching me. So you ran. The pieces were starting to fit together. But Romano went to prison 6 months later. His whole operation was shut down. Isabel laughed bitterly. You really think Romano was working alone? He was just the front man. The real power behind it all is still out there, still watching. Who? Think about it, Grayson. Who helped you close that deal? Who introduced you to Romano in the first place? The answer hit him like a punch to the gut. Richard, my own brother. Isabel nodded. I saw him meeting with Romano's men the day before I found the photos. When I realized I was pregnant, I couldn't risk it. Richard would have hurt the babies to keep his secret safe. So I ran. Your mother found me 3 months later. Mom knew? All this time? She helped me set up a new life here. Kept me updated. How about you? Made sure the boys had everything they needed. Isabel wiped her eyes. She wanted to tell you so many times, but she understood the danger was real. Grayson's mind was spinning. His brother Richard, the respectable banker, was involved in money laundering, had threatened the woman he loved, his own nephews. The boys, he said suddenly. Are they safe now? Does Richard know about them? I don't think so. Your mother was very careful. But now that she's gone, fear crept into Isabel's voice. That's why we were at the funeral, to say goodbye to the woman who protected us. I never meant for you to see them. But I did see them. And I can't unsee them, Isabel. They're my sons. They're wonderful boys, she said softly. James is the serious one. Straight A's, wants to be a doctor. Michael's our athlete, always moving. Nathan's the artist, lives in his own world. And Daniel, he reminds me so much of you, always taking care of everyone else. Grayson's heart ached hearing about his sons. Do they know about me? They know their father was someone I loved very much, who didn't know about them because it wasn't safe. They've never asked for more than that. She reached across the table and touched his hand. They're happy, Grayson. Protected. Not anymore, he said grimly. If what you're saying about Richard is true, Mum was the only thing keeping him in check. Now that she's gone, he'll start looking, Isabel finished. That's why we need to leave. Tonight. Start over somewhere else. No. Grayson's voice was firm. No more running. These are my sons too, and I've missed 10 years of their lives. I'm not missing another day. You don't understand what Richard is capable of. Actually, I do. Because while you were protecting our sons, I was working beside him every day. I know exactly what my brother can do. He squeezed her hand. But I'm not that naive young developer anymore, Isabel. I have resources, connections. I can protect you. All of you. How? First we gather evidence, everything you have on Richard, everything Mom might have kept. Then we go to the FBI, not the local police. They can't be trusted. But first, he checked his watch. What time does baseball? Practice end? Isabel's eyes widened. Grayson, no, it's too dangerous. They're my sons. I've lost 10 years of birthdays, school plays, and baseball games. I'm not losing another moment. He stood up. Take me to them, Isabel. Please, let me meet my boys. She looked at him for a long moment, seeing not the angry man who had confronted her in the library, but the person she had fallen in love with all those years ago, the man who had always wanted to do the right thing. Okay, she whispered, but we have to be careful. Richard has eyes everywhere. As they left the cafe, neither of them noticed the black SUV parked across the street or the man inside speaking quietly into a phone. Yes, Mr. Lancaster, he said. Your brother just left with her. Want me to follow? In his downtown office, Richard Lancaster smiled coldly. No need. I know exactly where they're going. Send our guys to the baseball field. It's time to meet. My nephews. The Riverside Little League field was alive with the sounds of children playing baseball. Grayson sat in Isabel's modest SUV, his heart pounding, as he watched 4 identical boys in blue uniforms running drills with their team. Michael's, the one pitching, Isabel said softly. He's got a natural talent for it. James is at first base, always reliable. Nathan prefers the outfield where he can daydream between plays. And Daniel, catcher, Grayson finished, watching the boy giving signals from behind home plate. Just like I was at his age. They all play because they love it, Isabel said. Not because anyone pushed them into it. Grayson turned to her. Like Richard pushed me, is that what you mean? Before she could answer, they noticed a black SUV pulling into the parking lot. Then another. Isabel grabbed his arm. We need to get them out of here, now. Grayson was already moving. Get the car started. I'll get the boys. He rushed toward the field just as practice was ending. The boys were gathering their equipment, laughing and joking with their teammates. Up close, they were even more remarkable. His eyes, his mother's smile, Isabel's gentle nature evident in their movements. Mom? James spotted him first, his young face suspicious of the stranger approaching them. Who's that with you? Before Grayson could speak, he saw men in dark suits getting out of the SUVs. He recognized them. Richard's security team. Boys, he said urgently, I know this is strange, but you need to come with me right now. Your mum will explain everything. We're not supposed to go with strangers, Nathan said, moving closer to his brothers. He's not a stranger, Isabel called out, running up to them. Boys, please trust me, we need to go. The fear in their mother's voice convinced them. They grabbed their bags and hurried toward Isabel's car. Grayson brought up the rear, placing himself between his family and Richard's men. They barely made it. As Isabel peeled out of the parking lot, Grayson saw his brother step out of one of the SUVs, watching them with cold eyes. Mom, what's happening? Michael asked from the back seat. Why are we running? Who were those men? James added. And who are you? Daniel looked directly at Grayson, his green eyes, so much like looking in a mirror, demanding answers. Isabel caught Grayson's eye in the rearview mirror. He nodded. It was time. Boys, she said, her voice trembling slightly. This is your father. The car went silent. 4 pairs of identical eyes stared at Grayson in shock. But you said our father didn't know about us, Nathan whispered. Because it wasn't safe, Isabel explained, taking a sharp turn down a side street. And it's still not safe. Those men back there, they work for your Uncle Richard. We have an uncle? James asked. One who wants to hurt us, Grayson said grimly. That's why your mother kept you hidden all these years, to protect you. From our own uncle? Michael sounded incredulous. Why? Grayson looked at his sons, really looked at them. They deserved the truth, but how much could they handle? Because sometimes, he said carefully, people were supposed to trust do bad things. Your Uncle Richard, he's involved in some dangerous business. Your mother discovered this years ago before you were born. He threatened her, so she ran to keep you safe. And Grandma Margaret helped us, Daniel said suddenly. That's why we went to her funeral. She always sent us birthday cards and Christmas presents. That's right, Isabel said softly. She protected us. Where are we going? James asked, always the practical one. Grayson had been wondering the same thing. They couldn't go to his place. Richard would look there first. Isabel's house wasn't safe either. The lake house, Isabel said suddenly. Your grandmother's lake house. Richard doesn't know about it. She left it to me in her will. Mom had a lake house. Grayson was surprised. She bought it under a different name just in case we ever needed somewhere safe to go. Isabel managed a small smile. She thought of everything. The boys were quiet, processing everything they'd learned. Then Daniel spoke up again. Did you ever try to find us? He asked Grayson. I didn't know about you until I saw you at the funeral, Grayson answered honestly. If I had known, nothing would have kept me away, not Richard, not anything. But you're here now, Michael said. Yes, Grayson felt tears in his eyes. And I'm not going anywhere. Even though it's dangerous, Nathan asked. Especially because it's dangerous. Grayson turned in his seat to look at his sons. You're my boys. I've missed 10 years of your lives. I'm not missing another minute. James, the serious one, studied him carefully. What do we call you? Whatever you're comfortable with. Grayson, Mr. Lancaster, Dad, it's up to you. The boys exchanged looks, having one of those silent conversations that only identical siblings can have. I think, Daniel said finally, we'd like to try calling you Dad. If that's okay? Grayson had to turn back around to hide his tears. That's more than okay. As they drove through the growing darkness toward the lake house, Isabel reached over and squeezed his hand. For the first time in 10 years, they felt like a family. But they all knew this was just the beginning. Behind them, a string of black SUVs moved through the night, following at a discreet distance. In one of them, Richard Lancaster looked at a photo of his brother and Isabel from 10 years ago. Find out everything about those boys, he ordered his men. School records, medical, history, everything. If they are my brother's sons, they're my ticket to keeping him quiet. And if they're not, he smiled coldly. Well, that would be an interesting twist, wouldn't it? Margaret Lancaster's lake house turned out to be a cozy 2-story cabin tucked away in the woods. As they pulled up the gravel driveway, their headlights caught the reflection of the water through the trees. The boys pressed their faces against the windows, taking in their grandmother's secret hideaway. It's not much, Isabel said, parking behind the house where they couldn't be seen from the road. But it's safe. It's perfect, Grayson replied, thinking how much it suited his mother's practical nature. Inside, the cabin smelled of pine and old wood. Isabel moved around with familiar ease, turning on lights and checking windows. She'd clearly been here before, probably many times over the years with the boys. You guys know where your room is, she told the boys. Go get settled while I talk to your father. The words still felt strange to everyone, but the boys nodded and headed upstairs, their baseball bags thumping against each step. They're handling this remarkably well, Grayson said once they were alone. Isabel started pulling out pots and pans in the kitchen. They're in shock. Trust me, the questions will come. And the anger. She looked at him. Are you ready for that? Before he could answer, his phone buzzed. A text from Richard. Brother, we need to talk about your new family. Come alone to the office tonight or things might get complicated. Grayson showed Isabel the message. Her hands started shaking so badly, she had to put down the pan she was holding. He knows, oh God, he knows about them. Hey, Grayson took her hands in his. Listen to me. He's not getting anywhere near them, I promise. Don't make promises you can't keep, she whispered. You don't know what he's capable of. Actually, I do, Grayson's voice hardened. Remember Jason Cooper? Isabel's eyes widened. Your old partner? The one who died in that boating accident 5 years ago? It wasn't an accident. I could never prove it. But Jason had found something in the company books. Something that scared him. The day before he died, he tried to tell me about suspicious transactions involving Richard's bank. Why didn't you go to the police? With what evidence? Everything disappeared after Jason died. But I've been watching Richard ever since, gathering proof. I just never had enough to move against him. Grayson ran a hand through his hair. I never thought he'd threaten my own family. Upstairs they heard laughter, the sound of their boys, still innocent despite everything happening around them. They need to eat, Isabel said, turning back to the kitchen. Growing boys always need to eat. Grayson watched her move around the kitchen, pulling out ingredients for spaghetti. Even after 10 years, he remembered her comfort food of choice. I'll help, he said, rolling up his sleeves. Tell me what to do. They worked together in comfortable silence, falling into an old rhythm. For a moment, it felt like no time had passed at all. The boys came downstairs, drawn by the smell of food. They had changed out of their baseball uniforms into regular clothes, making them look even more identical. Can we help? James asked. I make the best garlic bread, Michael added. That's because you put a pound of butter on it, Nathan teased. Better than your sauce that's practically water, Daniel shot back. But his smile took the sting out of the words. Grayson watched in amazement as his family, moved around the kitchen together. The boys knew exactly what to do, each taking their usual tasks. Even he found his place, following Isabel's quiet directions. Over dinner, the questions started. Do you really own a big company? Michael asked between bites. Several, Grayson answered. But they're not important right now. Are you rich? Nathan's directness made Isabel give him a look. What? We're allowed to ask questions, right? Yes, you are, Grayson said. And yes, I am, but money isn't everything. Says the guy who probably has a Ferrari, James muttered. Actually, I drive a Tesla, Grayson smiled. Better for the environment. Cool. All four boys perked up. Not that you'll be riding in it anytime soon, Isabel cut in. Not until this situation with your uncle is resolved. The mood sobered immediately. Why does he want to hurt us? Daniel asked the question they'd all been wondering. We're his family, Grayson put down his fork. Sometimes people let greed change them. Your Uncle Richard, he's done some very bad things to get money and power. Your mother discovered this years ago and he threatened her to keep her quiet. So that's why you didn't know about us? James looked between his parents. To keep us safe. Yes, Isabel's voice cracked. It was the hardest decision I ever made. But now we're all in danger, Michael said, because he saw us at the funeral. We're together now, Grayson said firmly, and I promise you, I will do whatever it takes to protect this family. Suddenly the lights went out. The cabin plunged into darkness. Mom? Nathan's voice shook slightly. It's okay, Isabel said calmly. The power goes out sometimes. There are flashlights in the drawer. But Grayson was already moving to the window. In the moonlight, he saw them, dark figures moving through the trees toward the cabin. Isabel, he said quietly, get the boys upstairs now. What's wrong? James asked, but Daniel grabbed his arm. Someone's out there, he whispered. Isn't there? Isabel was already herding them toward the stairs. Remember the hiding place I showed you? Go there, don't come out until I call you. But Mom, Michael started to protest. Go! Grayson's voice left no room for argument. We'll be right behind you. As the boys disappeared upstairs, Grayson pulled Isabel close. There's a back way out of here, isn't there? Through the woods? She nodded. It leads to an old boathouse. There's a car there, your mother made sure of it. Get the boys there. I'll hold them off. Grayson, no, listen to me. He cupped her face in his hands. I just found you, all of you. I'm not losing you. Again, go, I'll catch up. The sound of breaking glass from the kitchen made them both jump. I love you, Isabel whispered. I never stopped. Then she was gone, running up the stairs to their sons. Grayson picked up a heavy fireplace poker and moved into the shadows. He might be a businessman now, but he hadn't forgotten how to fight. And for his family, he would fight to the death. Outside, Richard's voice carried through the darkness. "Come out, brother. Let's talk about these nephews of mine." Glass crunched under heavy boots as Richard's men entered the cabin. Grayson stayed, hidden in the shadows, his heart pounding. Upstairs, he could hear the faint sounds of Isabel and the boys moving toward the secret exit. They just needed a few more minutes. "Playing hide and seek, Grayson." Richard's voice was closer now. "You always did like games, but I'm not playing anymore." A flashlight beam cut through the darkness. Grayson held his breath as it swept past his hiding spot behind the living room door. "You know," Richard continued, "I always wondered why Mom spent so much time in this dump of a cabin. Now I know she was visiting her secret grandsons, my own brother's children, hidden from me. That hurt, Grayson. Family should stick together. Like you stuck with Jason." "Cooper," Grayson called out, throwing his voice to confuse them about his location. "Is that your idea of family? Jason was a problem, just like you're becoming a problem." Richard's voice hardened. "But we can fix this. Just give me the boys." "They're children, Richard. Your own nephews. They're leverage. Insurance that you'll keep your mouth shut about certain things you might have discovered." Richard was moving through the kitchen now. "Give them to me and everyone lives happily ever after." Grayson heard footsteps on the back stairs, the ones leading to the hidden exit. Good, Isabel and the boys were almost out. "You know what your problem is, Richard?" Grayson moved quietly toward the front of the house, drawing attention away. "From the back. You think everything has a price, that you can buy or threaten your way out of anything." "Can't I?" Richard laughed. "It worked with Isabel, didn't it? One little threat and she ran away, taking your sons with her. Money and fear, that's what makes the world go round, brother." A floorboard creaked behind Grayson. He spun around just as one of Richard's men lunged at him. The fireplace poker connected with the man's shoulder, sending him crashing into a bookshelf. "There you are!" Richard's flashlight found him. Grayson didn't hesitate. He threw the poker at the light and ran. Bullets splintered the wood around him as he crashed through the front door onto the porch. "Don't kill him," Richard shouted. "We need him alive." The night air was cool on Grayson's face as he sprinted toward the trees. He had to lead them away from the boathouse where his family would be heading. Behind him, he heard Richard cursing as his men stumbled in the dark. Growing up, Grayson had always been the faster brother. Tonight, that might save his life. He ran, deeper into the woods, breaking through branches, making as much noise as possible. Let them follow him, let them think he was panicking. A root caught his foot, sending him sprawling. Pain shot through his ankle. Not good at all, nowhere. "To run now, brother." Richard's voice was closer than he expected. "Let's talk about this like businessmen." Grayson pulled himself up, testing his ankle. It would hold barely. Through the trees, he could see the lake gleaming in the moonlight. "Okay, Richard," he called out. "Let's talk, just you and me." "Drop your weapons," Richard ordered his men. "Give us some privacy." Grayson heard the sounds of footsteps retreating, but he knew better than to believe Richard was alone. "Remember when we were kids?" Richard emerged from the shadows, gun pointed casually at Grayson's chest. "How Dad always said I was the smart one, but you were the strong one." Dad was wrong about a lot of things. Maybe. Richard shrugged. But he was right about one thing. Family is everything. That's why I'm giving you a chance here, one chance to do the right thing. The right thing? Grayson's laugh was bitter. Like laundering money for criminals? Like killing Jason? Like protecting your sons? Richard's voice turned cold. Because if you don't play ball, Grayson, they'll grow up without a father, just like we did. A twig snapped in the darkness. Both brothers tensed. "You're not touching my sons," Grayson said quietly. "Already have." Richard smiled. "While we've been chatting, my men found the boathouse. Did you really think Mom's little escape plan would work? I know everything, Grayson, everything." Fear gripped Grayson's heart. "No, please no." Then he heard it. The faint sound of a boat motor starting up on the lake. Richard heard it too. His head snapped toward the sound. That moment of distraction was all Grayson needed. He tackled his brother, sending them both crashing to the ground. The gun went flying. They fought like they had as boys, but this wasn't a playful wrestling match. This was for survival, for family. Richard was stronger, but Grayson had more to lose. He managed to get on top, pinning his brother down. "It's over, Richard," he panted. "The FBI has everything. Mum kept records. Everything you did, everyone you worked with. She knew what you were, and she protected us from you." "You're lying," Richard snarled. "Check your phone. Right now, agents are raiding your office, your home, your bank. Mom's last gift to us was justice." The sound of sirens in the distance made Richard's face go pale. "You'd destroy your own brother?" "You stopped being my brother the day you threatened my family." Grayson's fist connected with Richard's jaw, knocking him out cold. Flashlights appeared through the trees, but these weren't Richard's men. FBI agents swarmed the area, weapons drawn. "Mr. Lancaster?" A female agent approached him. "I'm Agent Sarah Chen. Your mother contacted us months ago. We've been building a case against your brother ever since." "My family." Grayson struggled to stand, his ankles screaming in pain. "In the boathouse." "Are safe," Agent Chen assured him. "We had a team waiting there. Your mother thought of everything." Relief made Grayson's knees weak. Of course, Mom had planned it all. She had always been 3 steps ahead of everyone. "Dad!" The shout made him turn. Through his tears, he saw them running toward him, his sons, all 4 of them, with Isabel right behind. They crashed into him, nearly knocking him over, 4 pairs of arms holding him tight. He didn't care about the pain in his ankle. All that mattered was that they were safe. They were together, I thought, when Richard said he couldn't finish. "Mom got us to the boat," James explained. "But there were FBI agents waiting," Michael added excitedly. "They had guns and everything," Nathan said. "We were scared," Daniel admitted quietly. "But Mom said you'd come for us." "And you did." Isabel joined their group hug, her eyes shining with tears. "Your mother," she said softly. "She left me a letter telling me to open it if anything ever happened to her. It had Agent Chen's contact information and instructions about tonight. She knew Richard would follow us here." "She knew everything," Grayson said, watching as his brother was led away in handcuffs. "She protected all of us, right to the end." Around them, FBI agents were securing the scene. The night was chaos of flashing lights and radio calls, but in the middle of it all, one family stood together, holding each other close, never planning to let go again. "What happens now?" James asked, always the practical one. Grayson looked at Isabel, then at each of his sons in turn. "Now," he said, "we start being a real family. No more secrets, no more hiding, just us together. Promise?" Daniel's eyes, so like his own, searched his face. "Promise," Grayson and Isabel said together. Above them, the clouds parted, revealing a sky full of stars. Somewhere, Grayson thought, his mother was watching, smiling at the family she had worked so hard to protect. Finally together, finally safe, finally whole. The morning after Richard's arrest, Grayson sat in his mother's kitchen, surrounded by his family. The boys were devouring plates of pancakes, while Isabel fussed over his bandaged ankle. The FBI had insisted they return to Margaret's house. It was secure and familiar to everyone. "Does it hurt much?" Michael asked, studying his father's injury between bites. "I've had worse playing baseball," Grayson assured him, though truthfully his entire body ached from the fight with Richard. "Speaking of baseball," James spoke up, "are we still going to be able to play in the championship game next week?" Isabel and Grayson exchanged looks. There was so much to figure out. Living arrangements, schools, safety concerns. Baseball seemed both trivial and incredibly important at the same time. "Of course you'll play," Isabel said finally. "We're not hiding anymore, right?" Grayson nodded. "Right, but there will be security guards at the game. Just to be safe." "Cool," Nathan grinned. "Like bodyguards?" "Not exactly." Grayson tried to hide his smile. "They'll be very discreet." The doorbell rang, making everyone tense. But it was just Agent Chen, carrying a stack of files. "Good morning, everyone," she said, accepting the coffee Isabel offered. "We have some things to discuss." The boys took their plates to the living room, but Grayson knew they'd be listening to every word. "Richard's talking," Agent Chen began. "He's trying to make a deal, name some very powerful people involved in his operation." "How much trouble is he in?" Grayson asked, though he already knew the answer. He's looking at 20 years, minimum. Money laundering, conspiracy, accessory to murder in the Jason Cooper case. She paused. There's something else. We found evidence that he was embezzling from your companies, Grayson. Millions of dollars, hidden in offshore accounts. Grayson felt Isabel's hand slip into his under the table. The companies, he started, are clean, Agent Chen assured him. Your mother made sure of that. She'd been quietly documenting everything Richard did for years. The evidence she gathered is what finally gave us enough for the arrest warrants. That's why she bought this house, Isabel said softly. Why she helped us hide. She was building a case all along. Margaret Lancaster was one of the bravest people I've ever worked with, Agent Chen said. She protected her family while making sure justice would be served. From the living room came the sound of the boys arguing over the TV remote, such a normal everyday sound that it made Grayson's throat tight. What happens now? He asked. Now you live your life, Agent Chen smiled. But first, there are some decisions to make. The press will be all over this story. Prominent businessmen arrested, long-lost nephews discovered. You'll need to decide how public you want to be. Isabel's grip on his hand tightened. The boys need stability, Grayson finished. They need their normal lives, their friends, their school. We can help with that, Agent Chen said. Protection details, media management, whatever you need. But ultimately, this is a family decision. Family. The word still sent a thrill through him. Boys, he called out, come in here, we need to talk. They filed in, looking nervous. James, the worrier. Michael, trying to act tough. Nathan, lost in thought. Daniel, watching everything with those observant eyes. Things are going to be different now, Grayson began. People will know about us, about who you are, about what happened with your uncle. It might be hard sometimes. Will we have to move? Nathan asked in a small voice. No, Isabel said firmly. This is our home, we're not running anymore. But some things will change, Grayson continued. I'd like to be part of your lives, really part of them, not just visiting, but being a real father, if that's what you want. The boys looked at each other, having one of their silent conversations. Will you come to our baseball games? Michael asked. Everyone I can. And help with homework? James added. Absolutely. Can we visit your office? Nathan's eyes lit up. Anytime. Daniel, who had been quiet, finally spoke. Will you stay? Even when it gets hard? Grayson felt tears in his eyes. I will never leave you again, any of you. He looked at Isabel as he said this. Good, Daniel said simply, because we've waited a long time for a dad. Agent Chen quietly excused herself, leaving the family to their moment. There's something else, Grayson said once she was gone. This house, your grandmother left it to all of us. She wanted it to be a home for our whole family. You mean... Isabel's eyes widened. I mean, if you want, we could live here together. The house is big enough and it's already home to the boys. We could take things slow, figure it out as we go. Yes, the boys shouted before their mother could answer. Isabel laughed through her tears. I guess that's decided then. We'll need some rules, Grayson said, trying to sound stern but failing. And changes. The security system needs updating and we need a bigger TV, Michael interrupted. And a pool, Nathan added. And a dog. Daniel's eyes lit up. One thing at a time, Isabel said, but she was smiling. The doorbell rang again. This time it was David, Grayson's assistant, looking frazzled. Sir, I'm sorry to interrupt, but the press is gathering outside. They want a statement about your brother's arrest and... He looked at the boys. About your sons. Grayson stood up, leaning on his good ankle. Then let's give them one. All of. Das, sir? James asked. All of us, Grayson confirmed. No more hiding, remember? They walked to the front door together, Grayson and Isabel, their 4 sons between them. Through the window, they could see the cameras and reporters waiting. Ready? Grayson asked his family. 6 heads nodded. Together, they opened the door to face their new life, not as separate pieces trying to stay safe, but as one family, finally, whole. The cameras flashed as they stepped onto the porch, but Grayson barely noticed. All he could see was his family, standing proud and united, his sons no longer hidden, Isabel no longer afraid, and somewhere, he was sure, his mother was watching, knowing her plan had worked perfectly. The story of the Lancaster family was about to become tomorrow's headlines, but the real story, the one about love, sacrifice, and second chances, that one was just beginning. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of changes. The story of the Lancaster quadruplets was everywhere. Newspapers, TV shows, social media. Everyone wanted to know about the billionaire's secret sons and the brave mother who had protected them for 10 years. "Mom, we're on TV again," Nathan called out one morning, pointing to the breakfast news where their family photo was being shown. "Don't forget to eat your cereal," Isabel replied, trying to maintain some normalcy in their lives. Grayson looked up from his phone, where he'd been dealing with company emails. Moving into Margaret's house with Isabel and the boys had been the easiest decision he'd ever made, but balancing his business life with his new family life was proving challenging. "Dad, are you coming to our game today?" Michael asked. The championship game had been rescheduled due to all the chaos, and today was the big day. "Wouldn't miss it for anything," Grayson promised. "I've already cleared my schedule," the boys shared, excited grins. Having their father at their games was still a novelty that hadn't worn off. "Mr. Lancaster," David appeared in the doorway. "The board is requesting an emergency meeting about the company restructuring after Richard's arrest." "Not today," Grayson said firmly. "Today is about family." The pride in his son's eyes made any potential business complications worth it. At the baseball field, it seemed like the whole town had turned out for the game. Security guards dressed as regular parents blended into the crowd. Reporters had been banned, but people still stared and whispered. "Ignore them," Isabel told the boys as they got ready. "Just play your game." Grayson watched from the bleachers as his sons took the field, Michael on the pitcher's mound, looking focused. James at first base, steady as always. Nathan in the outfield, more alert than usual. Daniel behind home plate, calling the shots. "They're really good," he said to Isabel, who sat beside him keeping score. "They get it from their father," she smiled. Then her face grew serious. "The school called yesterday. They want to know if the boys will be continuing there next year." "What do you think?" "They're happy there. Their friends have been surprisingly protective since everything came out." She paused. "But there have been some issues. Parents wanting special play dates because of who their father is. Teachers treating them differently." "We could look at private schools," Grayson suggested. "More security, more privacy." "No," came a voice behind them. They turned to see James, who had just finished his inning. "We want to stay at our school." "You're supposed to be in the dugout, young man," Isabel said, but she was smiling. "The team needs water breaks," James shrugged. "And we've been talking. We don't want everything to change just because people know who Dad is." On the field, Michael struck out another batter, and the crowd cheered. "Some things have to change," Grayson said gently. "For safety." "We know," James nodded seriously. "But not everything. We like our lives, Dad. We just like them better with you in them." Isabel wiped tears from her eyes as their son ran back to his team. The game was close. In the final inning, with bases loaded, Daniel caught a foul tip for the final out. The crowd erupted as the boys' team celebrated their championship victory. Grayson and Isabel rushed onto the field with the other parents. For once, no one was staring or whispering. They were just another family celebrating their children's success. "Did you see that catch?" Daniel was beaming. "And Michael's curveball," Nathan added. "James saved us with that double play," Michael said. "We did it together." James smiled. "As a team, as a family," Grayson thought. Later that night, after the celebration pizza and ice cream, after the boys had finally gone to bed still wearing their championship medals, Grayson found Isabel in the kitchen. "Penny, for your thoughts?" he asked, seeing her distant expression. "I was just thinking about your mother," she said. "She would have loved today." "She saw plenty of their games," Grayson said. "You told me she came whenever she could." "Yes, but always sitting far away, being careful not to draw attention." Isabel's eyes filled with tears. "She never got to cheer openly for her grandsons." Grayson pulled her into his arms. "She gave us this, all of us together. That's better than any cheering." "Dad?" They turned to see Daniel in the doorway. "Can't sleep?" Soon all four boys were back downstairs, still buzzing from their victory. "Tell us about when you played baseball," Nathan asked Grayson. "Well," he settled onto the couch, boys crowding around him. "There was this one championship game when I was about your age." Isabel watched them from the kitchen doorway, her 4 sons and their father already so close despite the years apart. The past weeks hadn't been easy. There were still reporters calling, curious neighbors dropping by, business complications to sort out. Richard's trial would be starting soon, bringing more publicity and painful revelations. But watching her family now, she knew they could handle anything together. A security guard's radio crackled outside, their new normal, but inside they were just a family sharing stories and laughter. "Mom, come sit with us," Michael called out. "Dad's telling us about his baseball days." She joined them on the couch, fitting perfectly into the space they made for her. "Did I ever tell you about the time your mother came to one of my games?" Grayson asked the boys. "She brought a sign and everything." "You didn't," Isabel laughed. "Oh, I have pictures," he grinned. "Your grandmother kept everything." As Grayson told the story, embellishing it to make the boys laugh, Isabel looked around at her family. 10 years of secrets and fear had led to this moment. All of them. Together. Happy. Safe. The front page news would eventually fade. The curious onlookers would find new things to gossip about. But these simple moments of family joy, this would last forever. Outside, a car drove slowly past the house, its headlights sweeping across the windows. The security team tracked its movement, but inside, the Lancaster family didn't even notice. They were too busy being exactly what Margaret had always wanted them to be, a real family, sharing love, laughter, and a future full of possibilities. The morning of Richard's trial dawned cold and grey. Grayson stood in front of his mirror, adjusting his tie, trying to steady his nerves. Today he would have to face his brother in court and testify about everything: the threats, the money laundering, Jason's death. "Need help with that?" Isabel appeared in the doorway, already dressed in a simple blue suit. "Just like old times," he smiled, remembering how she used to fix his tie every morning when they worked together. "Dad?" They turned to see all 4 boys in the doorway, dressed in their Sunday best. "We want to come too." "Absolutely not," Isabel said immediately. "But we need to be there," James argued. "For Dad." "And for Grandma," Daniel added quietly. Grayson and Isabel shared a look. They had been debating this for days, whether to shield the boys from the trial or let them be part of this final chapter. "The press will be there," Grayson warned. "We're not scared of reporters anymore," Michael said firmly. "And Uncle Richard needs to see us," Nathan added, "to see what he almost destroyed. Sometimes their sons seem so much older than their 10 years. "Okay," Isabel finally agreed. "But you stay with Agent Chen the whole time, and if it gets too intense, we know, Mom, we'll leave." The courthouse steps were crowded with reporters and cameras. The Lancaster family walked up together, heads held high. The boys flanked their parents, identical faces, serious and determined. Inside, Agent Chen met them in a private room. "Richard wants to talk to you," she told Grayson, "before the trial starts." "No," Isabel said immediately, but Grayson was already nodding. "I need to do this." The holding room was small and bare. Richard sat at a table wearing an orange jumpsuit instead of his usual designer suits. He looked older, defeated. "Hello, brother," he said quietly. "Richard." Grayson remained standing. "I saw them, you know, your boys. They look just like you did at that age." "Don't talk about my sons." "They're my nephews, Grayson. My family, too. You lost the right to call them family when you threatened their mother. When you tried to use them as leverage." Richard's facade cracked slightly. "I never meant. Things just got out of control. The money, the power, it was like a drug." "Save it for the judge." Grayson turned to leave. "Mom knew," Richard called after him. "For years she knew what I was doing. Why didn't she stop me sooner?" Grayson turned back. "Because she was trying to save you, Richard. She gathered evidence, hoping she'd never have to use it, hoping you'd change. But when you threatened her grandchildren, she chose them over me." Richard's bitter laugh turned into a sob. "Her own son. No. You chose money over family. She just made sure you couldn't hurt anyone else." Back in the courtroom, Grayson took his place on the witness stand. As he testified about Richard's crimes, he kept his eyes on his family. Isabel holding their son's hands, the boys watching everything with solemn understanding. When he described finding Jason Cooper's evidence, his voice shook. When he talked about Isabel having to flee with their unborn sons, he saw tears in the jury's eyes. Richard's lawyers tried to paint him as a loving uncle, a victim of circumstances. But the evidence was overwhelming. Margaret Lancaster's meticulous records, Jason Cooper's hidden files, the offshore accounts. During a break, Daniel slipped away from Agent Chen and found his father in the hallway. "Are you okay, Dad?" Grayson pulled his son close. "I'm okay. It's just hard seeing what your uncle became. Mom says sometimes people lose their way. Your mom is very wise. But you found your way to us," Daniel said simply. The jury took only 2 hours to reach a verdict. Guilty on all counts. As Richard was led away, he looked at his nephews one last time. "I'm sorry," he said softly. "I wish I had been a better uncle." 20 years, Agent Chen told them later. No possibility of parole for at least 15. Outside, the courthouse reporters shouted questions, but this time Grayson stepped up to the microphones. "Today justice was served," he said, his family beside him. "Not just for our family, but for everyone Richard Lancaster hurt. My mother spent years gathering evidence, protecting innocent people while trying to save her son's soul. She couldn't save him, but she saved something more precious, the next generation of our family." He put his arms around his sons. "These boys are her legacy. Not the money, not the companies, but the love and courage she showed in protecting them. That's the true Lancaster legacy." Later that night, back at home, the family sat in the living room. The boys were unusually quiet, processing everything they had seen. "What happens to the company now?" James asked. "Well," Grayson smiled, "I was thinking it's time for some changes, maybe a new name, Lancaster and Sons." The boys' eyes lit up. "Really?" Michael asked. "Really? You're my future. All of you. Does this mean we have to wear suits to school?" Nathan groaned. Everyone laughed, the tension of the day finally breaking. "No suits required," Isabel assured them. "Just be who you are." "Who we are is Lancasters," Daniel said proudly. "Yes," Grayson pulled Isabel close. "We're Lancasters, the kind Margaret always wanted us to be." Outside, the last of the news vans were finally leaving. The trial was over, Richard's crimes exposed, but inside, a family that had been built on secrets and fear was building something new, a future based on love, truth, and the strength that comes from facing life's challenges together. As the boys argued over what movie to watch, Grayson and Isabel shared a look. This was what Margaret had protected. This was what made all the years of separation worth it. This was family. 1 year had passed since Richard's trial. The gardens of the Lancaster estate were once again filled with white flowers, but this time the occasion was a joyful one. Isabel stood in front of a mirror, adjusting her simple white dress while her sons, all wearing matching suits, watched with bright eyes. "You look beautiful, Mom," James said, always the first to notice when she was nervous. "Like a princess," Nathan added, earning grins from his brothers. At 11, they were trying to be too cool for fairy tales, but some things never changed. "The guests are arriving," Michael reported from the window. "And Dad's pacing in the garden," Daniel added with a smile. Isabel took a deep breath. After everything they'd been through, after all the years apart, she and Grayson were finally getting married. This time, there would be no interruptions. No secrets, no fear, just love and family. "Boys," she turned to face her sons, "I need to tell you something." They gathered around her, these 4 pieces of her heart who had grown so much in the past year. "You know your father and I love you more than anything," she began. "We know, Mom," they said in unison, making her laugh. "Well, soon you'll have one more person to love." She placed a hand on her stomach. "You're going to have a little sister." The room erupted in excited shouts and questions. "Does Dad know? When is she coming? Can we teach her baseball?" "One at a time," Isabel laughed. "Yes, your father knows, I told him last night. She'll be here in about 6 months. And yes, Michael, you can teach her baseball, though maybe wait until she can walk." A knock at the door revealed Agent Chen, Sarah now, after everything they'd been through together. She had traded her FBI suit for a bridesmaid's dress. "It's time," she smiled, "and Grayson's about to wear a hole in the grass with his pacing." The ceremony was everything Margaret would have loved. Simple, elegant, focused on family. The boys walked their mother down the aisle together, then took their places as their father's best men. Grayson's eyes filled with tears when he saw Isabel. She had never looked more beautiful, glowing with happiness and their secret joy. The few minister spoke about love and second chances, about families that grow stronger through adversity. But the most touching moment came during the vows. "Mom, Dad, wait," James spoke up. His brothers stood with him. "We wrote something too." From their jacket pockets, they each pulled out carefully folded papers. "Dear Mom and Dad," they read together, taking turns with the words they had written. "Thank you for loving us enough to keep us safe. Thank you for finding each other again. Thank you for showing us what real courage looks like. Thank you for being our parents, together and apart." There wasn't a dry eye in the garden. Later, during the reception, Grayson pulled his family aside. They walked together to Margaret's favorite rose garden, where a new bench had been installed. "Your grandmother should be here today," he said, running his hand over the bench's bronze plaque. "Margaret Lancaster, who loved enough to save us all." "She is here," Daniel said softly. "She's always with us." Isabel touched her stomach gently. "She'll be with this little one too." "A girl?" Sarah, who had followed them, asked in surprise. "Margaret Rose Lancaster," Grayson announced proudly. "If that's okay with her brothers?" The boys exchanged looks. "She'll need a lot of protection," James said seriously. "And someone to teach her sports," Michael added. "And art," Nathan chimed in. "And how to be brave," Daniel finished, "like Grandma was." Back at the reception, the boys insisted on making a toast. They stood together, these four young men who had been through so much. "To our family," they said. "Not just Mom and Dad, but everyone who helped us get here. To Grandma Margaret, who loved us before anyone knew we existed. To Sarah, who helped keep us safe. To all of you who supported us this past year. And to our little sister," Daniel added with a grin, causing excited murmurs among the guests, "who will grow up in a family built on love, not fear." To Margaret Rose, Grayson raised his glass. "And to second chances." That night, after the guests had gone and the boys were asleep upstairs, Grayson and Isabel danced alone in the garden. "Happy?" he asked his wife. "More than I ever dreamed possible." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "Your mother would have loved today. She planned it, you know." He smiled at Isabel's questioning look. "I found her diary. She had notes about wedding details, ideas for when we finally found our way back to each other. She never lost faith in us. She gave us everything." Isabel touched her stomach. "And she's still giving." Above them, stars filled the summer sky, the same stars that had watched over their sons all those years in hiding, the same stars that had seen Margaret working tirelessly to protect her family, the same stars that would now watch over little Margaret Rose. "What are you thinking?" Isabel asked, seeing Grayson's distant look. "About family. About how sometimes the strongest bonds are forged through the hardest times." He pulled her closer. "About how lucky I am to have this second chance with you, with our boys, with our daughter on the way." From upstairs came the sound of muffled laughter, the boys no doubt still too excited to sleep. "Should we check on them?" Isabel asked. "Let them be," Grayson smiled. "They're celebrating their family. All of us together the way it always should have been." As if to agree, a warm breeze rustled through Margaret's roses, carrying their sweet scent across the garden. Somewhere they both knew she was watching, smiling, her greatest wish fulfilled, her family whole, happy and safe at last. The Lancaster legacy would live on, not in business empires or banking dynasties, but in the love of four boys who grew up protected by their mother's courage and their grandmother's wisdom. In the daughter who would know only love and security. In the family that proved that sometimes the longest road leads exactly where you're meant to be. And as Grayson and Isabel shared one last dance under the stars, they knew that this wasn't really an ending at all. It was just the beginning of their greatest adventure, being the family they were always meant to be.